Hi, I'm Amanda Sum. I am a recent graduate of SFU from the Theater Performance Program in the School of Contemporary Arts. I was asked today to speak a little bit about my song and video called Groupthink, which you just watched and heard, so thank you. And I guess the first thing I'll say about it is that the song recording was written, produced, played, engineered, mixed, and mastered by an all-female team and features an all-Asian female band. And the music video was directed by Mayumi Yoshida and features an all-Asian female cast as well. And I say this because SFU really taught me to value process over product, and I really wanted the process of making the song and video to reflect what I was talking about or singing about. So what the themes of the song are is kind of equating humans to machinery, in that internally we're programmed and we have all these parts sending signals to each other to be able to function, and then externally we're socialized and shaped to think or act a certain way. Yeah, so I don't want to color it too much to allow room for you to interpret that how you will in how you come against the societal constructs that are set out for you, or a more general thing. But for me, I kind of view it as every action I take or the work that I make is always in relation to certain norms that are set out. And for me, often that's projected stereotypical young Asian woman stereotypes. So I kind of want to push against that within the music thematically, and then reflected in the behind the scenes process as well. So I hope you enjoy the video. I hope the rest of the event goes well today. Thank you for having me. Take care. Bye.
I'm always so moved by the talent found within the SFU alumni community. Thank you so much, Amanda, for getting us started with your single Groupthink. There are many great messages to take away, and we appreciate you sharing with us this evening. A link to Amanda's website is now being shared in the chat box if you wish to learn more about her. On behalf of Simon Fraser University, I'd like to welcome you. My name is Nicole Dorsers, and I'm the Director of Alumni Relations at SFU. Tonight, I'm joining you from the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations, where I have the privilege to live, work, and play. If you know which territory you're currently on, please type it in the chat box, as I know we have alumni joining us from all over BC, across Canada, and well beyond our borders. If you're not sure, no worry, we're putting a link in the chat box that should help you. So let's see where we have individuals joining us from this evening. Great, and I'm seeing some Kwantlen, Coquitlam, Tiamo, Squamish. Great, wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. And again, we really appreciate the response to this evening's event, and I think it really reflects the importance of this conversation. Before we go any further, I'd like to review some quick housekeeping rules to help us run smoothly this evening. Many of you will already be familiar with Zoom webinar, but for those of you who aren't, please note the following. If you're having any technical difficulties at all or need assistance, please use the chat box located at the bottom of your screen to send a quick message to Tech Help, and we will be there to help you. To ask any questions of our speakers or to comment on the presentations, please use the Q&A box, which is also located at the bottom of your screen. And lastly, closed captioning is available for the event. To turn it on, click the box marked CC on your toolbar. You may also view the live transcript in a separate browser by clicking the link in the chat box. There will be many important takeaways this evening, and this session is being recorded and will be made available for public viewing after the event. I'd like to acknowledge that while all of our alumni are special to us, there are some groups that we would really like to welcome and particularly recognize this evening, including representatives from the SFU Board of Governors, our SFU Alumni Association Board of Directors, honorary degree recipients, our outstanding alumni award recipients, and charter alumni members. Thank you all for joining us. With that, we are so grateful to the people here today and to our valued alumni and friends around the world for your commitment and service to SFU. Together, you help strengthen the global community, and we greatly appreciate the many ways you help bring the promise of SFU to life. Our alumni family are among the largest supporters of SFU, and we are grateful for all that you do for your alma mater. We have alumni that support us through hiring students for internships and co-op placements, hiring graduates, helping recruit exceptional students to SFU programs, helping us build a thriving SFU community through your attendance at events like tonight, donating to programs and initiatives across SFU's campuses, supporting many key priorities through SFU through your donations, and supporting meaningful initiatives that resonate with you, including SFU Student Urgent Response Fund, which supported over 2,000 students in need of emergency funding at the start of the pandemic. We also saw a large amount of support for help and counseling services, which provided meaningful support to SFU students during these particularly challenging times. Have no doubt that your efforts have a real impact, and we appreciate and applaud your commitment to SFU. We saw over 2,000 graduates cross the virtual stage in October this year and are thrilled to welcome them into our alumni family. At the same time, President Joy Johnson was instilled into the community as well. This is Joy's first event this evening with our alumni community since becoming SFU's president. As president, Joy is committed to enhancing student learning experiences, working towards Indigenous reconciliation, and advancing equality, diversity, and inclusion across the university. Please welcome President Joy Johnson.
Well, thank you ever so much, Nicole, and thanks to all of you for joining us today. I too want to begin by acknowledging that I am privileged to join you today from the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh people. It certainly is a privilege to work in such a beautiful place, albeit a rainy place. And I recognize that as settlers, we have a responsibility to address and repair relations between ourselves and the Indigenous people whose lands we occupy. You know, like Nicole mentioned, this is my first alumni event at SFU as SFU's president. I would much prefer to have an in-person event, but it's wonderful that we can all be together here in this virtual world. So I want to get started and love to see who's in the room, who's in the Zoom room with me today. So we're going to put up a little poll, and I'd ask you to complete the poll for me. And as you're completing it, I want to just say as well, you know, how glad I am to be here and how proud I am to be the president of Simon Fraser University. I have to admit, even in the midst of a global pandemic, there is nowhere I'd rather be working. And so thank you to all of you for the support you've been showing me. The student experience is certainly one of my priorities as SFU president, and we at SFU have been working really hard every day to deliver the very best possible educational experience that we can. And over the last 2 months, I've been meeting with student groups, and I've been learning firsthand how our students are struggling. I think we're all experiencing challenges at this time. So before I go on, I'm just going to check the poll results to learn a little bit more about who's with us. So we've got lots of alum, we have some students, we have some people who are faculty and staff, and we've got a variety of people who are here for professional reasons, some for personal, and many for both. And I have to admit, I'm here for both as well. So thanks to all of you for that. I also want to say that this isn't the way that our students expected their first university studies to be. Many students are experiencing financial hardships, as has been mentioned, and they're facing a future that really is looking uncertain to them. And so I think we can all agree that it's important that we support our students right now, because we look to them as a promise for a better future. In spite of all the challenges, our students' determination and resilience has been truly inspiring to me, and I know to many of our faculty and staff as well. And the support from the university community has been outstanding. I can't thank you enough, our alumni in particular, for your generosity during such a critical period. We've been very fortunate. The Student Urgent Response Fund that we established in April has grown to over $365,000 and has supported 2,000 students. These funds have been used for everything from plane tickets to reunite students with their families to purchasing the technology needed to study remotely. Last year, SFU alumni raised $83,000 for Health and Counseling Services Development Fund. Those funds have helped support two priorities for SFU Health and Counseling, and I want to just tell you about those. One is the My Student Support Program. This program enables students to access professional mental health support online 24 hours a day in several languages from anywhere in the world. It's also helped provide this access case managers. And these are skilled social workers who help students with everything from finding housing to crisis management to enrolling in pharmacare. Our access case managers show our students that people care and are there to support them. Their work has helped to reduce wait times for counseling services, enabling students to get the help they need more quickly. So I really want to give a shout out to the amazing team at SFU Health and Counseling who've been able to offer support in person and online throughout the pandemic. Health and Counseling also offers a variety of programming to promote health and well-being, help students stay connected and find resources that they need to succeed at their studies. I'd say usually about 1 in 5 students need support with their mental health. But with feelings of anxiety, depression, or stress heightened by the pandemic, that number is likely higher. So far this year, over 400 alumni have donated $46,000 to the Health and Counseling Services Development Fund, and that's helping us meet this need. In these difficult times, I must say it's essential that students can access free and convenient help wherever they are, whenever they need it. And support again from alumni like you has helped us to continue improving and growing these programs. It's been a remarkable collective effort. If you want to learn more or join the many alumni in supporting this great cause, we're going to post the link in the chat so you can learn more. The university has also been focusing our efforts on ensuring all members of our community feel supported and valued. The pandemic has revealed deep inequities in our society. And as SFU president, equity, diversity, and inclusion is a priority for me. I am working with groups across SFU to foster an environment where everyone feels welcome and respected, and where there are equal opportunities for engagement and success. We are in the process of embedding EDI across all areas of the university, and it's not something that I can create alone. It's something that we all have to commit to, and I invite you to join me in this journey. And I know that this is a difficult time for all of us. It's difficult for our students, but also for us and for our families. And so before I introduce the panel, I want to check in with all of you to see how you're doing. I'm just going to put up another poll to get a sense of how you're doing and how those around you are doing. So I'll let you complete that survey. As you're completing the poll, I'm happy to report that SFU will be able to offer carefully selected in-person learning in January 2020, hopefully creating a little bit more opportunity for face-to-face interactions. And that is if we are safe to do so. I know we can't wait to have our community back together again when it is safe. It feels very lonely on our campuses right now. Again, I can't thank you enough for your support for SFU and for our students. And so before I introduce the panel, let's check in and see how our audience is doing in relation to how they're feeling these days. So in terms of the question, how much has your mental health been impacted? Some say minimally, about 23%. Some say somewhat, 55%. And 22% say significantly. And you know, that doesn't surprise me. I'm running into people on a regular basis who really are struggling right now with isolation or concerns over health. How much has the mental health of those around you been impacted since COVID-19? 10% say minimally. Wow, 60% say somewhat, and 32% say significantly. I think this just shows how important this panel is right now for us to be thinking about mental health issues and for us to be having what I consider to be a critical conversation. So thank you for sharing your sharing that data with us. So with no further ado, I want to welcome our panelists for tonight. Our first panelist, Dr. Yabome Gilpin-Jackson, has a Bachelor of Business Administration and a Master of Business Administration from SFU. In addition to her SFU degrees, Yabome holds a Master's in Human Development and a PhD in Human and Organization Systems from Fielding Graduate University. Yabome is a multi-award-winning scholar practitioner in human organizational development. She's an executive leader, organization development specialist, consultant, and educator in leadership and transformational change in academia and across the private, public, and not-for-profit sectors. She considers herself a dreamer, doer, and storyteller committed to imagining and leading the futures we want. So thank you, Yabome, for joining us tonight. I also want to welcome Darrell Burnham. Darrell, who has a Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology and a Master's in Business Administration from SFU, has been Chief Executive Officer of Coast Mental Health for the last 6 years. In 2014, Darrell received an Outstanding Alumni Award from SFU for his service to the community. Darrell's been involved in many organizations helping to promote improvements in community mental health in Canada. He is an active member of Rotary International for over 25 years and is currently a member of the Rotary Club of Port Moody. So thank you also to Darrell for joining us tonight. Our final panelist, last but not least, is Dr. Jody Samra. She holds a PhD from SFU and is a highly regarded expert in psychological health and safety. And for the past 2 decades, Dr. Samra has been involved in numerous national initiatives that have contributed to policy change in Canada. Jody is a national thought leader on issues related to psychological health, wellness, and resilience. Thank you for joining us tonight, Jody. So I want to start the panel off by checking in with all of you. I'm going to ask all of you in turn, how are you doing? How are things going personally for you during this challenging time? And how's your mental health? Jody, let me start with you. How are you doing?
Well, great question, Joy, and welcome everybody. And my real pleasure to be here speaking this evening. I think like many of us, things have been up and down and come in waves. And personally, as a small business owner who has 2 companies, one was able to kind of pivot to a virtual world pretty easily, but I also have a startup company that launched exactly 8 weeks before the global pandemic was announced. And so much of the stress that those of us that are small business owners have felt was very heavy in those first couple of months. I have found things kind of evolved over time, the last number of weeks in particular, with the social political climate and all of the things happening in the world, kind of combined with the shorter days and darker season that we're entering into, have led to a little bit of a melancholy feeling these days.
Yeah, I totally understand that. Daryl, how about you? How are you doing these days?
Well, it's been up and down through the pandemic, I must admit. I started with the sourdough phase and learned how to do that. And then I kind of went into the binge watching phase and shortly into golf. And I'm now solidly in the Harlequin movie phase. And I'm not proud of that, but it's where I am. It's what we do to cope with the stresses, the ups and downs. And just as Jody mentioned, there are certainly cycles in life, and the external issues have been also quite challenging as well.
Yeah, boy, humor is also very important, I think, in this time. Yabome, how are you doing?
You know, I'll use the language in the poll. You know, it was minimal, somewhat insignificant, and similar to the other panelists, I would say a yo-yo. Up, you know, the roller coaster, up and down, depends on the day and depends on what's going on. And for me, I would say, you know, in the beginning was probably drawing on the tools that I'm privy to, and would have said, at the beginning of the pandemic, I was still holding at minimal. And then for me, what compounded the situation is also the social issues. And so that word that we hear a lot of, intersectionality, mattered, because at that point, I would say I moved quickly from minimal to somewhat, and on some days significant. And then in the middle of this, the reality is that life continues and life matters. Life happens as well as matters. And I've also experienced loss during this time, family loss, not related to COVID, but illness and loss. And so those were significant mental health challenging moments. And the reality is the pandemic is there, but everything else hasn't stopped.
Yeah. Well, I think to experience a loss on top of everything else is really just adds, piles on. So thanks for sharing, all of you, how you're doing. I want us to start even just pre-pandemic. It just seems that we have been hearing a lot more in the media about mental health. And I just love your comments on this. Do you think people are talking more about mental health today than they were, say, 5 to 10 years ago? Daryl, what do you think?
Oh, absolutely. We started an event called the Courage to Come Back Awards in 1989 to celebrate recovery of people with mental illness and other types of issues. In the first years, we hardly talked about it because we didn't feel comfortable even talking about that we're a mental health organization. But the last 5 to 10 years, as you mentioned, people are really rallying around mental health as a cause, that they raise money for that. And I think also the younger generation, they're just so open to talk about the mental health issues. They're actually leading, I think, the conversation. I think my generation is probably less able to talk about mental health issues, but certainly I think it's really been a change in the last few years.
Yeah. Jody, do you agree? Do you think people are talking more, or are there also more mental health issues out there? I guess that's the other question.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'd say it's a combination of both. And I echo the comments that Daryl made. And I think we've seen some wonderful kind of national anti-stigma campaigns. For example, Bell Let's Talk, where we've had individuals that are high profile, right? Kind of media and celebrities that have been willing to share their stories. And I think that's served us very well in terms of kind of educating the average person that there are no boundaries when it comes to educational status or socioeconomic status or other demographic factor, that we all will be impacted. As I often say, we live long enough and we go through enough life experiences, every single one of us is going to be impacted. Certainly since COVID, the data don't lie, and I'm a researcher at heart. We have seen rates of anxiety quadrupling. We've seen rates of depression doubling. We have seen alcohol consumption rates. The most common self-medication for mood issues has gone up at least 25%. So we've also started to see quite a substantive, significant increase.
Yeah, interesting. What about you, Yabome? It's interesting. I just saw something across the chat as well around, different groups, social groups in particular, experiencing more stress and strain. Do you think over the past 5 to 10 years, we've seen more incidents, particularly in equity-seeking groups, more incidents of some of the stresses and strains?
I wonder if it's that we're seeing more, if we're just acknowledging more. If we're just being truthful and realistic with ourselves about what has always been the case. And, I think about the fact that when I was graduating from SFU back then, just before Y2K, there was all the talk about, maybe Y2K is going to propel us into all of the reality of the opportunities and the challenges of a digital world, and there was all that hype, and then nothing happened. And really, we came through it relatively unscathed. And what the pandemic has done is really reveal, unfortunately, often with transformation, there's this sort of seismic event that happens that propels further. I think those equity-seeking groups will have told anybody who was listening about the issues years ago. Yeah. When this happened and people started approaching me to do different kinds of talks, I started, going back to whether it was blog posts or journal pieces I had written, or some of the things I've written in books, and I'm like, it's all here. I've been talking about it for these 5-10 years. I think people are just more ready to listen, because now the impact is widespread. And so unfortunately, in a lot of instances, people have to be personally affected and impacted before they're willing to open up. So that's what I think about it.
Yeah, no, interesting. I want to just kind of explore a little bit more what you see happening. Yabome, you've mentioned some of that, but since March or February, basically, our lives have been kind of turned upside down, and I'm wondering if the three of you can comment on how you are seeing people's mental health being affected at this time. Yabome, do you want to just keep going with that and share what you're seing? And also in terms of institutions as well.
In terms of institutional life, absolutely. It's so, again, to Joti, your point earlier, the research don't lie. Some of the Canadian research out of Conference Board or other local, as in national Canadian research bodies are showing the increase in mental health concerns across the board in workplaces and in society. And Joti, your comment earlier, certainly almost double for equity-seeking groups. And so what is happening right now is that escalation, that increased awareness. But I think the silver lining in this is communities coming together, and even in workplaces starting to look for strategies to support each other, and to not only continue to be in the conversation, but to look for strategies that are required for all of us to cope, and for all of us to be able to I hesitate a little bit on the resilience word, because sometimes we use it to cover up things that we really ought to be unpacking, but to be resilient, and also to look forward to what do we need to continue to move forward and thrive as human societies.
Yeah, thanks for that, Yabome. Jody, how about you? What are you seeing in your practice in terms of how people are dealing and the effects on people's mental health right now?
Yeah, certainly the increases that we're seeing in terms of anxiety and depression and substance use, quite strikingly, yet not surprisingly, the other two areas that we've seen most through our clinical practice group is relational and rifts in relationships. And one of the things that any kind of stress or crisis does is it amplifies cracks that may already be existing. And so we have seen a tremendous uptick in terms of the number of relational issues. Of course, our bubbles are restricted and we don't have some of the distractions and other things that can get us away from facing some of the things that may have already been occurring, but were just expedited. The other piece that has been very interesting has been a lot of people are questioning a lot more about kind of values and thinking more about values, right? What's really important to me, what's meaningful, and I sometimes will think about the existential crisis that's been posed by COVID-19 plus, right? And I say COVID-19 plus because COVID just kicked off the year with a bang, and there's been a whole host of things that have followed since. And for a lot of people, it's leading us, I think, in very good and important ways to step back and think about values, think about meaning, think about purpose. And, whether it's the sourdough or I've been gardening and painting and things that you just think, I didn't realize this actually is something that really matters to me.
Yeah, interesting point about how cracks get magnified. Daryl, you work with a population of people who do have some serious mental health issues. Are you seeing exacerbations, more difficulties?
Yes, we're seeing probably more incidents. We're seeing more overdoses. We have a portion of our programming is for people who are often substance users, so we see a lot of that. I'll use the technical term. I think people are a bit more grouchy. And so just there, you see a bit more conflict, interpersonal conflict come out as a result. Staff and certainly the clients, I think because of this uncertainty and the wear and tear, I think it's been longer than we wanted. And so we're trying to get through that. By and large, people are coping reasonably well, but there are also those pressure points here and there, and they kind of emerge more some days than others.
Yeah. I see there, we do have some questions coming in. I just want to pursue a couple more areas and then we'll get to the questions that are coming in. We've talked also, we've mentioned some of the other social dynamics that are taking place, and we can't talk about mental health right now without talking about Black Lives Matter and the racism that we're also experiencing in our society, and how that also affects our Black, Indigenous, and people of color in our communities. So I'm just wondering about how we can work to really affirm experiences of equity deserving groups at this time, and really how we can pay particular attention to this added layer. Yabome, do you want to start us out on that one? You've kind of made reference to that, but I'd love to hear more.
Yeah. No problem. Thank you so much. I think what we can do, and for obvious and non-obvious reasons, I'm very passionate about this, is do the work at every level. And by that, I mean at the level of understanding the issues, opening up the dialogue, being in those conversations in the workplace, in community, in our families, and doing the work to understand, but moving beyond that understanding into connecting. I said earlier that a lot of times we're not able to move forward in whether that's in the workplace or in society, in the social context, until people can connect to why this is important and why it matters. And so really moving beyond understanding what the experiences are of Black, Indigenous, and people of color, which can engender a whole bunch of responses, emotional responses, traumatic responses, helplessness, hopelessness. Well, I don't know what to do. So pivoting from that into connecting people to, this is a human problem. This is not only about Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And all we all need to do is look into our own lives across the board for when we've had human traumatic situations and what it meant to us to have our fellow human family be part of helping us solve that. And then moving from connecting to actually taking action. I think oftentimes in organization strategy, you might see a strategy around education and training, which is only about the understanding realm, and then it doesn't pivot forward to those other levels. Or you see strategies around, let's go straight to action and let's do these quick two things. And then you're into tokenism because you're not actually deeply attending at a systems and structural level to the issues, and you're skipping that connection step. So people are doing it and wondering, why are we even doing this? Is this really the right way forward or the solution? And so really taking it one step at a time, starting at the beginning and working through, whether that's individually, in your family, in your community groups, or in organizations. It's really going through the whole arc of what's needed for systemic change.
Yeah, thank you. Jody, are you also seeing these dynamics playing out in your practice in terms of equity deserving groups and the struggle that they might be experiencing because of some of the dynamics at this time?
Absolutely. I mean, we see a range of individuals, both in our consulting practice, at our workplace leaders, managers, CEOs, individuals, as well as in kind of family units. And I think there's a lot of uncertainty. It's hard. I think as Canadians, I feel that I need to say that our climate, I'm very grateful to be living, first of all, in the beautiful place that we do and where we live. And it feels like our culture is different, yet not, and it's a little more subtle. And I think that there's some challenges that I'm seeing with people in being able to articulate the impact on them, because they may say, look, I'm very grateful to be living where I do, and while things may not feel apparently or objectively or explicitly the same as we may see, say, in media, that there's this undercurrent of kind of uncertainty and unsurety about what to do.
Yeah, interesting. How about you, Daryl? I mean, you mentioned some of the dynamics at play. I'm interested in how things are happening.
I think actually, if we work with a lot of folks who are homeless, and unfortunately, the Aboriginal or Indigenous community is 10 times more likely to be homeless, and it's just awful. And it's a breakdown of all sorts of systems to do that. But I think that's the biggest one again. And I think the issue with tolerance, and it's been a problem. I think people have been less tolerant these days. And so where I used to think we were a fairly tolerant community, at times there's a lot of blaming and shaming of the poor, of the homeless, people who use substance uses. And that doesn't help us. We have to change that conversation and move forward. The folks are there for reasons, and many of those reasons are completely out of their control.
Yeah. You know, it's so interesting, Daryl, you mentioned the homelessness issue, but also the opioid crisis. And so you layer those factors on top of everything else. And it really is a perfect storm right now. And my heart goes out to these communities. It's such a difficult time. You know, it's interesting just starting to look at the questions. Some of them, I think people are here in part because they want your advice. About ways that people can cope right now. I think a lot of us are feeling a little frayed around the edges. You saw the poll results. And so maybe a next question that I'd love to hear you comment on is your best advice. What are some of the most effective ways that people can cope right now with some of the mental health challenges that they're experiencing? Daryl, what do you think?
Well, if they're really having a serious issue, don't be afraid to talk to someone, either a friend, if they have a really trusted friend, or a professional. Many workplaces have EAP programs that provide free professional counseling for someone. It can be a great freedom, and it's not just a commercial for the psychologists. It's important for people to start that conversation and get some good guidance. And there's a lot of pressure on our lives these days. And I'm fortunate from an employment point of view that we're in an essential service. But there's so many people who lost work or struggling just to make mortgage payments. It can be overwhelming. And so they may need to talk to people just to help sort those things out, get some control over what seems to be at the time uncontrollable. So please feel free to ask for help. You will get it, and it will, even the process of talking about it will relieve a lot of that strain.
Thanks, Daryl. Jody, what would your advice be for people in terms of how they can take care of their mental health right now?
Yeah, a number of things. One is to keep in mind we are highly resilient beings, and we are wired to not just survive adversity, but thrive in the face of it. And we forget that when we're in the midst of it. As human beings, what we also do is we spend a lot of real estate up here in our brain focusing on things that we cannot control. And the reality is there's a whole host of things that we will absolutely have no ability to have any influence over, and to orient our mind toward controlling the controllable. And so what are these things? I mean, we're talking about social distancing, and I have a little pet peeve with that term because we're physically distancing. And in fact, you know, many people are finding they're socially connecting at a deeper level than they ever were. And I think, you know, I know many of us have a love-hate relationship with technology these days and getting Zoom fatigued out. It is a real thing. But the beauty of technology is don't take shortcuts to, you know, avoid the contacts with people and find creative ways, right? Have dinner together with somebody on video, check in on phone, you know, over the phone, and stay socially connected. Every ounce of literature will tell us that our social connections are the single most important thing that can help us survive adversity. And there's a few things that we can do every single day. So the same way, you know, we get a little bit of movement and drink water and nourish our food, let's be thoughtful of what we're putting in. Mostly plants and vegetables should be going into our body, low on processed, low on alcohol. Personally, I have a gratitude practice every morning, or most mornings, the odd time I forget, and very quickly, somewhere between the snooze button, the first snooze I hit, and my first coffee, I'm identifying 3 things, big or small, and you can put things on repeat that you have gratitude for and hold on to those.
That's great advice. It's interesting. I certainly know in my social circles, people kind of giggle about the need to have an extra glass of wine at the end of the day, but it is a concern, isn't it, Jody, that people are turning to alcohol and other drugs to just kind of flatten that feeling at the end of the day, because it is so stressful. And I do think we need to be aware of that. So that's great advice. Yabome, what advice would you give?
Really building on what has already been said, Jody, I think you covered the self-care fundamentals. That's your bread and butter 101 of self-care, whatever it is that works for you, whether that is, you know, going for a walk or running or being with the family pet, whatever it is that helps you stay grounded, those personal self-care strategies. Darrell, really love where you went. We are social beings. So the ability to get out of our heads and talk to another person, you know, whether it's one other person, I like to talk about your trusted 3. right? So finding that trusted triad, I certainly have one in my life. We meet monthly, and we are 3 Black women, and we're all in the leadership and OD space. We talk about everything personal and professional. We vent, then we get a grip, and we ask ourselves fundamental questions that keep us moving beyond the trauma of the current state into what can lead us to find that transformation. To your point, we not only survive, we can thrive, and transformation is um, research shows actually in most traumatic contexts, about 75% of us move on and are transformed by these experiences. Those are not clinically monitored, though. If we struggle too much and go see a professional, as we should, or if we end up in a situation where we're not able to, I keep using the word get a grip just because it's common language, get a grip on our psychological processes that have us stuck, and we're experiencing PTSD, see a professional, do that. Those get tracked. And so we have more data on that. What we don't have data on is post-traumatic growth and transformation in the midst of adversity and trauma that is a normal, to Joti's point, human reaction, in an area that I have researched and studied. The biggest thing with achieving transformation in the midst of trauma is being aware of your triggers, moving from the unconscious into the conscious of what's happening for me right now and making new meaning of it. So whether that's your gratitude practice, Jyoti, whether that's remembering what matters most right now. So for us, we ask ourselves some fundamental questions. What matters most? What's the biggest contribution I can make in this time? What will make me feel most alive? It's those questions that get you out of the trigger and the rot and the stuckness and move you forward.
Thank you, all 3 of you. Great advice all around. I'm going to go to some of the questions now. We've got a question here from Val, and it's, I feel there's a greater and more immediate visceral response to everything that's happening in our daily lives. How do I respond, and how do others see and reflect on what's happening to them? The sense of, immediacy. What advice would you give Val? Jody, what would you say?
Well, one thing is recognize that our emotions, even those that are uncomfortable or unpleasant or negative or feel unbearable, they serve a function, and that we should be responding right now, right? If we had zero emotional reaction, we'd have another issue. And so know that our anxiety is serving a purpose, and there's a few things that our emotions can tell us. And so sometimes what it does is it motivates us to take action, right? So the worry we all now have, right? Wallet, phone, and mask as we leave the door, that kind of feeling motivate some action. Sometimes it's simply a self-validation, right? That things in the world are not the way that we wish it would be. That gives us information about things that are important to us. And the third, and I believe this is one of the most important, is often it's a trigger for us to connect with somebody. Again, we're social beings, and that connection, and to reach out and talk. And talking works, and talking helps, and talking is highly therapeutic.
Thanks, Jody. I'm just going to keep going through some of these questions and ask each one of you to respond to maybe one of them. Here's a good one. Today, for a while, I forgot that it is Wednesday. When I totally get this, I actually call Thursday Blur's Day. When will we be able to process the reality of what we are experiencing? I think that's such an interesting thing. It seems so surreal right now. So Daryl, when are we going to be able to process what's happening?
Well, I think March 3rd. You can write it on the calendar. We still have a few more months of this. I'm hoping that once the vaccines start being rolled out, even though we'll still have lots of COVID in our world, there will be a real relief to see that we've actually have something to really address the pandemic. But we've probably got till June or even October before we're truly out of the woods. But I do think that life will start feeling better as the spring emerges next year.
Yeah, so challenging. Such an interesting time.
May I add a quick comment to that?
Please do, Yabome.
And that is to say, I absolutely agree with you, Daryl. We're in this a few more months. And one of the biggest mental tricks, if you will, is it's denial. And so when will we start living with this now? I think the biggest way to move forward out of the psychological strains we're experiencing is acceptance. It's acceptance, accepting where we are as individuals, families, and as a society, and then thinking about, okay, well, what does it look like when I'm in that visceral reaction, like Joti said, what action can I take? What can I do? Or maybe you do nothing and you just accept it for what it is and choose to live with it anyway.
Yeah, interesting. Another question, do you think the pandemic has caused identity crises in people and caused them to feel a little bit lost right now? Who'd like to answer that one?
Yeah, I'll jump in. That I say yes. I mean, I've been,
Yes.
one of my most popular corporate sessions has been the existential crisis posed by COVID-19, and I think for so many, and it goes to kind of some of the earlier comments around values and meaning. And I think when we're forced to, I saw a cute kind of meme on, you gotta love social media and the memes that we see these days. But if you can't go outwards, go inwards. And I think it is forcing many of us to face things that the busyness of life lets us avoid. And I think that sentiment of feeling a little bit lost, not really sure, who am I? What do I value? What matters is a very, very common sentiment that many, many are experiencing. And we see hundreds of people through our clinical practice each month. And I'd say that is one of the strongest themes that we are seeing. So no, you're not alone. And how do we translate that into, something actionable is to think, okay, what is the life I want to be creating? And, if we wave that proverbial magic wand and could have things look the way that we want to within things that are within our control, what matters most? And do a hierarchy list, put pen to paper, write it down.
Yeah, that's great. Great advice. Here's another question. Loneliness versus being alone. How best to be okay with being alone for now? What advice would you give about loneliness versus being alone? Daryl?
Well, they're completely different kind of concepts. You may feel comfortable being alone, but you have networks, virtual networks. Loneliness is that's more of the negative reaction. You're alone and you feel like you're you're alone in the world. And it's certainly something I worry about with many of our clients who've had their lives disrupted by COVID and access to supports and things like that they get really, really lonely. And Yabome talked about the trusted three. It would be great if people can actually find people there, because everyone wants to talk. They really do. And so if people can actually kind of cultivate a group that they can actually share, even if it's just sharing your angst at the moment. That is so helpful. So loneliness is a big issue. It's been a big issue in society for many, many decades, frankly, that I've been in this field. But there's something we can do. And I think one of the things with the virtual worlds we're working these days, there are less barriers to doing that.
Yeah, that's great. That's very helpful. I'm going to ask a question that someone asked me to ask this panel, and that is, if someone discloses that they are struggling with their mental health, how do you talk to them and what should you do? Or if you notice that someone's struggling, what's our responsibilities? What should we do? I think some of us feel like maybe I shouldn't say anything. I might make it worse. So what advice would you say to all of us for those? And you saw again the poll that we have family, friends, people around us who are struggling. What is it? What can we do? Yabome, what would you say?
I would repeat a few things we've already said. We are social beings. Daryl just said we really want to talk. And, different personalities, some people might struggle to get there on talking, but what humans need more than anything in that circumstance is trusted listening and some really clear, simple questions to assess where they are and their willingness to further open up. And so I think what you do is listen well, ask some simple probing questions around where people are, how are you really doing, how are you really feeling, I noticed this, I'm here to listen, basically encourage that crack, that opening of the door to listen. And then if you're not, for those of us that are not clinical professionals and not psychologists and therapists, really nudging to, what, this seems like a lot. Has this been helpful? If not, are you open to looking for help? And really understanding that people can get there, and all we can do, and all of us can do this. We all, as elementary school teachers will say, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. We can all listen well, and then we can all offer simple things to help nudge people forward. And I mean, there's the odd case where further, and I'll look to you, Joti and Darrell, where further intervention might be needed. But in the everyday case, in your workplace situation, people just want people who will see, hear, and understand them. People want to be listened to, and that in itself is transformation and can help nudge people forward.
Thanks so much, Yabome. Jody, what would you say? Any other
I would
advice?
very well put, Yabome, and I would echo all of your comments. And I would add to, think about times when you've been under distress. There's no perfect words.
No.
It's the presence of someone you trust, where you feel safe, that is unconditionally there to listen. And one of the biggest barriers why people don't do anything, whether it's in our work environments and leaders or managers, or whether it's in our personal environments, is this worry that we're somehow going to make something worse by saying the right thing. So remember, it's not the words we say. Thank them for trusting you and sharing with you, and ask a simple question: how can I help support?
That's great. Great advice. Thank you. I'm seeing our clock tick down, and there's so many more questions, and I have so many more questions. But before I go to a last question, I just want to check in with each of you and see if there's anything that you wanted to say today that you haven't had a chance to say. Any additional comments that you want to make? And Darrell, I'll start with you.
I was just going to follow up on what Jody said. I do a lot of public speaking, or relatively. After a meeting, people surround me and talk about their story. So I do think that if you see somebody might be being distressed, if you tell them a bit about your story, your experience, it gives them permission and a signal that they'll be heard, and it'll be safe to talk about it. So that would be the message I would have.
Yeah, that's so important. And in part, that's why we started today by checking in with everyone. I think just to acknowledge we're all humans, we're all struggling as well, and to try to find a way to have this conversation. So that's great. Yabome, anything else that you want to add right now that we haven't covered? I know our time's been short.
Yeah, no worries. I think 2 things. One would be, Robert Keegan, who is a developmental psychologist, wrote a book at the end of the 90s called In Over Our Heads, The Mental Demands of Modern Life. And he talked in that book about basically with the way the world is going and what's now being called the 4th Industrial Revolution by the World Economic Forum, that there's different mental demands, and we all have to acknowledge, even though, all the research says, don't multitask, it's not good for our brain. He says we have to accept the reality that we are in a space and time and era where we are multiple things to multiple people. And in that book, he talks about being, teacher, parent, all these different professional and home roles. And boy, did the pandemic ever put all of us in extreme ways. And his conclusion is we need higher level consciousness that in some ways we've been resisting as humanity, even though we know this is where we're going. So we need to self-author. We need to get a grip on all the things that we trigger on in order to function in this modern world. And actually, we keep saying we're going to a postmodern world. We need to move beyond not only self-authoring, but self-transforming, because we need to also see the systemic issues and deal with them. The pandemic for me is an exclamation mark on that book and on the messages in that book and on that thinking, self-authoring and self-transforming in order to address societal issues. So I would say just think about the fact that we're all in this. This is not abnormal. This is about the transformation of our humanity. And we can get there if we just accept where we are and adapt and thrive, because we can. We've done this era after era. And I'll just put a plug in for silence too. Sometimes when it's awkward and people are struggling, you might ask something and they'll say, you know what, I don't really feel like talking about it right now. I started saying life happens and there's also been loss for me in this time. One of the things I remember deeply in a situation of loss is someone coming and sitting and saying, for somebody who's really talkative, I wasn't talking a lot. And they're like, I'll just be here every day. And they just came and sat every day. And I remember that sensation so deeply. So I want to put a plug for silence too.
That's great. Listen, I've just gotten the warning that we're closing down, and I am concerned that we do have some people tuning in today who might be struggling with their own mental health concerns. And I'm just wondering if you can suggest, and we will put some things into the chat, some resources that people might be able to use right now. Jody, over to you. What are some key resources that you'd recommend?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things our team has been very committed to expediting a whole host of free content, webinars, blogs, videos, etc. And we'll be sending a whole host of links of those. Know that there's a lot of public domain content out there. The Canadian Mental Health Association, there's a program called Bounce Back for CBT resources freely available as well. And 1-800-SUICIDE, a number to keep in mind if anyone is in acute distress.
Thank you very much, Jody. Daryl, any resources you want to point out right now?
Well, I think if you're working for a company, find out if it has an EAP, because it's a free counseling resource. It's easy to do it. You can either do it in person or all virtual now these days. It's a great resource, and it's there if you're in a company that has that.
Thank you. Yabome, final word. Any resources you want to point out?
And I know that some will be shared that I've shared already, but you know, it's just the currency of keeping calm in these times. There's a couple of blog posts about that, and just, you know, calm leadership that encourages clarity as well as generativity to look at what's possible in the midst of this.
Thank you very much. And I do want to say that to those who are joining us this evening that we will be sending a list of resources out to all of you. You don't have to necessarily copy everything in the chat right now. We will get those resources out to you. And I encourage you to reach out if you are struggling to these resources. They, I think, can be very, very useful. Wow, it's gone so quickly, and there's so much more we could have talked about. I want to thank our panelists ever so much. I actually feel a little bit better myself right now, having talked about these issues. So thank you very, very much. And I really appreciate you spending time, 3 great alumni spending time talking about important issues. So let me turn it back to Nicole to finish things up for this evening. Over to you, Nicole.
Wow, I was really struck by just the depth of this conversation. As Joy said, she feels better, and as do I. It's been really great to follow along. And I was really, you know, I really took away a lot of the common themes of community, the importance of coming together, trusted listening, and also leading with compassion. So I thank each of you for sharing your expertise with us. President Johnson, thank you for bringing together this wonderful conversation. And Jody, Yabome, Daryl, you all brought such different perspectives, and we truly appreciate it. A sincere thank you to all of you. Information to everyone joining us, information on upcoming events can be viewed on our events page, and the links will be provided in the chat box. As Joy mentioned, shortly we will be sending an email with the links to all of the resources that were provided this evening, as well as information about how you can get involved, provide support, and support students through some of the additional programs that were mentioned this evening. In this email, we'll also include a very short 2-minute survey. We would love for you to take a moment and fill that out, providing us feedback on tonight's session, as well as any of the upcoming programming opportunities you'd like to see. With that, thank you again for joining us. This was a fantastic conversation, and we wish you well, and a sincere thank you for your time.